All right, I think we can begin. Welcome, everyone, to this webinar. I am Rick Moakler. I serve as the Executive Director for California Head Start Association, and we're delighted to have so many of you joining us this morning for the webinar. Our plan today is we've got really three presenters and myself. I will talk a little bit initially, it's a 1-hour broadcast, talk initially just about the intent behind the survey. I'll then introduce Kevin Wharton, who is the economist and comp analyst who provided the real kind of expertise in developing and publishing the study. Then we will introduce Seth Feinstack and Shelley Schwain, who are with Whipfly, to talk about how one uses this kind of a data. What are strategies for a local program in compensation planning? So we're really clear in commissioning this research that we wanted to be able to provide programs the best data we could, and then we also want you to have the tools to know how to implement it locally, whether you do it yourself or whether you engage a consultant to develop your own local compensation plan. And then finally, we are planning to save about 15 minutes at the end of this call for questions and answers. And so you'll note that you have the ability to type in questions, and you can go ahead and type in a question at any point during this presentation. I will then actually sort of summarize and digest the questions and pose them to our presenters at the end. Wanted to mention, too, that this entire webinar is being recorded. So if you wanted to go back and review something or refer someone else to it, you'll be able to go to our website, the CHSA website, and view it there. So by way of introduction, this is a new venture for California Head Start Association to be conducting this kind of a study. And it really came out of a number of requests that we had from member programs who said, you know, we're doing these studies locally. They're time-consuming, they're expensive. We think if it was conducted on the state level with an organization like CHSA, we could actually do it more efficiently and actually have a larger data pool. And that really started the conversation for us. That's the kind of role that we're always looking for as your association, is what can we do together on the state level that is going to help you do your job more easily and more efficiently. So I mentioned that too because we're very interested in your feedback. What worked about this? What, you know, in future iterations, what would work better in this report or the way we conduct it? The final thing I wanted to mention about the survey is that it is true that the Office of Head Start does require programs to conduct wage surveys, and certainly, you know, this was followed with that federal guidance. So this data meets the OHS standards. But really, we're seeing it as much more than that. Our goal in conducting the study was to present to you really effective data to help you with your management, to help you develop good systems, to have equitable pay scales that are competitive and work for you. So that's, you know, that is what is driving this project, and that's really how we are going to evaluate its success. That being said, we have just published this report. I know that some of you on this call have already purchased it and have begun to review it. Others of you may be deciding whether or not you're ready to go ahead and acquire a copy, and that's all good. What I want to do now is introduce Kevin Wharton to provide an overview on some of the top-level findings and a little bit about our methodology in approaching this. Kevin?
Great. Thank you very much, Rick. I appreciate the introduction to everyone. What we have done with this survey is we launched it late last year, and of course, I would presume almost everyone on the call had received some invitations and reminders. Probably don't need to tell you too much about our methodology other than, of course, what we had done is using my firm as the intermediary to protect your confidentiality onto specific that you may have had during the process. And so we used the online survey, and of course also had a lot of interactions with various folks who wanted to make sure that they had the terminology right, we're putting the right people in the right categories and the like. But overall, when all was we had, of the total, member and non-member programs who were invited to participate, we had 63 that provided relatively complete data. A few more had actually attempted response. We're not including that in this denominator. But overall, the response rate of 45% of programs in California was really good, really strong. The N, or the number of observations, for the various survey questions is not going to be the same because, human nature being what it is, some folks may have chosen not to answer a few questions. Or in turn, for specific positions where those positions were not represented within their program, of course, they did not, provide comp data. So the maximum N for any of these questions is going to be 63. And as you'll see in a few pages, that also gave us the ability to provide not only overall results for California, but also a level of reporting where we could also report by program type, agency type, size of program, region in terms of CHSA cluster. So overall, we were able to provide both sort of a top-level, set of data for the folks who responded, and also to be able to let them drill down to find programs that are much more similar to their own. Now, what we found, just to give you a sense for what the characteristics were of the programs, and I know that sometimes it can be a little misleading, but just to give you a sense for who answered. Overall, the programs reported a median, which is the midpoint, the point above and below which 50% of all respondents will fall. We found that the midpoint for respondents in terms of their staff was 89. The midpoint in terms of students enrolled, 476, and the median operating budget was $5.1 million. What we found also, just in terms of who answered, 90% of all respondents identified themselves as Head Start programs rather than, say, for example, early childhood development programs or non-child development programs. Also, there was a good split in terms of geographic area. 37% were in rural areas. 37% identified themselves as being in heavily urbanized areas, and 20% were in some kind of a suburban setting. You can see here, of course, also just about 2/3 were private profit, and the other, 1/3 were split between being other public agencies and school districts. And again, those are all splits that we use to help report some of the data, particularly when it came to compensation by position. And so, of course, the key thing here is that we did so, of course, because, compensation levels did vary, by a different area within the state. So can you advance to the next slide? I'm missing that ability here. So, okay. Can you go back one, please? Okay, thank you. Now, in terms of employee earnings, what we had looked at was, coming up with two different levels of data that we could report to you because, one of our questions for every position was, is your basis for compensation exclusively or predominantly, annual salary versus an hourly wage equivalent? And what we wanted to do, because, of course, some of you answered either one, we took the data and converted it both to an annual equivalent and in turn turned it into an hourly wage so that you could sort of visualize the level in terms of how folks had responded. We also asked in the survey what your typical work week was so that we could also do that hourly conversion so that we were using either your own program's data or a standard figure to convert to an hourly wage. A lot of our reporting here will just go ahead and tell you some figures for what we saw by position in terms of that hourly wage equivalent. Obviously in the report we have a little bit more detailed, but just to give you sort of a general sense, the average the average earnings for a CEO were around $53 an hour. For someone with a director position, $43 per hour. 42 for CFOs, and then you can see how the figures tend to decline a bit as we get into other positions. The overall report has approximately 50 positions, and of course, perhaps the most important ones for us to reference would also be, of course, the teacher 1, 2, and 3 positions, who respectively had hourly wage equivalents of about $19 for teacher 1, $16.50 for teacher 2, and just under $6 for teacher 3. I didn't include that in the slide, but thought that might be a little important to share with everyone. At the other end of the scale, and here at the bottom of the slide, you can see that only bus monitors were paid really close to the current California minimum wage, and then other positions such as, a teacher assistant, cook and assistant cook, caretaker, and custodians were each paid a mean of $12 or less per hour, just to sort of give, again, a sense for the distribution of hourly earnings. Can you advance to the next slide, please? Okay. Now, just to give you a sense for what the actual report looks like, and of course we'd alluded to this before, but you can see here for one position, just using Family Services Manager for an illustration, you can see in the top where, for example, we had asked individuals to give us their number of average years, and that may sound strange if you only have one person in that position, but of course we're collecting data for some positions with a lot of people in those roles and some positions where there would have only been one. This position had an average of 10 years of experience. In the middle, you can see that the you can see that the N is 41 of the 63 respondents. Sorry about that. And then you can also see what we refer to as percentiles across the top of this. And I'll stop using my mouse to try to highlight things. But what you'll find, of course, is that there's a distribution where the average, what we normally think of the average, the mean, was $56,850 a year in terms of that annual salary. And in terms of the hourly wage, it was $23.72. The median is oftentimes a little different if the mean is distorted by some fairly high figures. Here you can see that they're actually pretty similar. And then another important figure is what we'll refer to as the quartiles, or the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. And you can see what that range is, basically between 46,774 and 63,500. It falls half of respondents, and then 1/4 each are earning more than 63,500 or earning less than 46,700. And so then below that, you can just see the more details, so you can get a sense for what the report looks like. In the middle portion of it, you can see what the means and the quartiles and the medians were by geographic cluster, by budget range. We used four categories there to make it a little easier to find your own agency or find peers. You can see by demographic breakdowns in terms of the overall area, urbanity, suburban or rural, agency type and program type. All of those reported if there were sufficient numbers of observations. We cheated just a little bit here. We try to show as much detail as we can, so we do show in cases where there might only have been a couple of respondents who, for example, had a family services manager, but we wanted to make sure that we were showing as much detail as we could. And then at the bottom, you can also see what the predominant education level was reported for by each of the programs. So in clusters 1, 2, and 3, 4, et cetera, you can see what proportion of people actually held, that education level that were being responded. In a few cases, you can still tell there are zeros because, in these cases, a couple of the programs decide not to respond. But overall, this does lay out, I think, fairly clearly, what the compensation practices are of your peer organizations. Okay. Now, just to give you another element, we had done our background research before. We knew that also analyzing benefits were very important. Of course, what we've profiled here is the level of, background or the number of years of experience that were reported. Not too surprisingly, administrative staff have more experience than, for example, many of the education and health nurses, lead teachers, education specialists, et cetera. And so what we also found, of course, is that, the highest level of educational attainment is also held by those administrative staff. So we won't go into too much detail there, but again, part of the report is also dedicated to not only telling you what the average earnings are for people in those positions, but also how long they've been on the job, and of course what their educational profile is as well. Now here at the bottom of the slide, you can see just a few highlights to a fair amount of detail in the survey itself. But the most common, benefit being offered, you can see that 80% are offering medical insurance for their managerial staff. More than 73% do so for their other staff. And what we find here is that in each of those questions, we asked for what we hope was a fairly simple breakdown. Do your policies, are they different for those two categories of staff? In turn, we also found that in terms of other prevalent services that are being offered, life insurance, medical insurance for dependents' family, and also maternity, paternity leave are also offered to in a majority of the programs to their managerial and to their other staff. But again, this will also feature bar charts where you can see in detail for quite a few benefits how frequently they are offered to either managerial. Okay. Then as far as other practices, just to sort of help provide a little bit more background on what we found that, for example, at least one-third offer contributions for a retirement program, a 403B or a 401K. They also offer disability and long-term insurance, and they do so for both managerial and other staff in at least one-third of the programs. More than one-third also offer a mobile or handheld purchase and related fees. And professional membership dues to managerial staff, and that's the other most common service that's being offered them. You can see here what proportion of them offer dental, life, or disability insurance overall. Of course, you can also see that other positions that have 50% or fewer being offered, for example, dental and life, and a smaller proportion in each of those positions are being offered disability. So again, just wanted to give you some highlights on what the report's telling us about the level of benefits that are being offered, by level of staff. And of course, you can also see, how prevalent the different structures are. HMO, PPO, HSAs, HSA compatible. So you can see how often those are being offered. Finally, of course, we also asked about, for example, the threshold. One-third of respondents indicate that the threshold that they set for their programs for eligibility is that they offer them only to full-time equivalents. Otherwise, about 1/4 of them do make their staff who work 75% of the hours, that would be the FTE level, are eligible, and a similar proportion, about 25%, also make staff who work half of the FTE level eligible. So that level, we hope it wasn't too difficult to respond, but we wanted to make sure that we offered you a really comprehensive picture of both compensation and the benefits that are being offered, by position where we could, and of course, the benefits category of staff. And so that's pretty much it as far as just a quick. I will turn it over to Rick, just with regard to how to order a copy of the findings. So.
Great. Well, thanks, Kevin. I think that's a great overview. So for just more details on the survey itself, you can go to the website and you see the link there. I wanted to mention that for folks who order this, a copy of the report, and ones who have already ordered it, we're actually including one free customized data run. And Kevin will be coordinating with you directly on that, but it'll be an opportunity if there's a particular way you want to run a search with particular comp programs within a geographic area, or other variables that isn't reflected in the way that we actually published it in the report, can produce that for you. So you'll be hearing, if you've already ordered a copy of the report, you'll be getting a follow-up email from us about that. So at this point, now let's assume you've got your data from whatever sources that you're acquiring it, and you're of comps, and you're looking to think about how you use that to develop an effective compensation plan. This is where I would like to turn it over to our friends at Whitley, Seth and Sally, to walk us through that.
Thank you, Rick. And thank you, Kevin, very much. Some really good information on the data that is available through the CHSA wage comparability survey there. So what we want to do here is take that data, take that great information, and tie it into the overall compensation plan. We speak with and work with a number of Head Start agencies and help to not only come up with the compensation plan, but to strategize around it. So the big picture, why do we do a compensation plan, and why is this important? Well, of course, there's what we refer to as the floor rationale, which is, well, we have to do it. The regulations say that we are required to do a compensation plan to ensure that we are paying comparable wages, equitable wages, and we'll go over those regulations at a high level on the next slide here. But above and beyond the regulations and the fact that we have to do this is the reasons really that matter more to the organization. And those are summarized here. So one of those is that you want to be paying fair and equitable wages. You want to recognize the value of each position within your organization and how that relates to other positions within the organization. And this may be within Head Start, within the Head Start program alone, but you also may be looking at the value of a Head Start position with another program position, and it could be a very similar position, but they're just in different programs. So you want to understand what value each of those positions brings and how they relate to each other, even if they're in one program or another. You want to make sure you're paying salaries that are equitable for the work being performed. Of course, we want to make sure our compensation is fair for the work that is being done by our employees, and that the pay is up to par as much as possible here. Of course, there's a lot of elements that go into this, funding and the COLAs that were coming down here, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So a lot of elements that go into paying equitable salaries, but we want to make sure that, as the next box here says, we're keeping our top talent, we're attracting top talent, and a big portion of this is going to go into paying equitable salaries. You also want to ensure that you're equitable across departmental lines. So again, this may look a little more across program lines, but if you've got an administrative assistant, for example, in one program, and an administrative assistant in another program, you want to be paying them equitably. And if you're not, there should be a reason why. And we have the tools to be able to help you assess that and have your rationale, not only for yourself and your strategizing, but in case you're questioned by any kind of monitors, or anyone within the organization, even an employee, you want to have that rationale under your belt. So again, top talent, that is what we're looking for here. We want to make sure we not only have quality within the organization, but quality in the classrooms with our teachers and our curriculum specialists. And we want to ensure wages are comparable to similar work in organizations you compete with for employees. Of course, we hear a lot about this with the teachers right now and the degree requirements that have come down, that a lot of teachers are being lost to the school districts because they can pay a little bit more, but the requirement for those teachers are the same. So unfortunately, a lot of the teachers are moving to the school districts, and a compensation plan can help you to better compensate or prepare for that potential loss of employees and prevent the loss of employees to different organizations that are providing similar work but may be able to pay a little bit more. Again, just understanding the bottom line and strategizing around compensation for your employees. And then, of course, we want to make sure that there's consistency and accountability, not only within the executive or leadership team, but throughout the manager and supervisor lines as well. So a compensation plan helps increase the understanding of pay administration. A lot of this is we like to make sure that you're empowered within your organization to either move this whole process in-house if you happen to have those resources, and if you don't have those resources, to be able to maintain a plan in-house. So you're not reaching out every year to understand what kind of salary trends or movement trends have been happening in your labor market, that you're able to have the knowledge and the know-how to keep that in-house as much as possible and use your funds for other pieces. Again, maybe some quality pieces and something a little more proactive so that you can maintain in-house and understand exactly how pay administration is working within the organization. We want to minimize the inconsistent administration of pay. Again, a lot of that will fall back into top talent, attracting and retaining your qualified employees, making sure everyone is happy, and if you get questioned again by anyone who comes in, monitors and whatnot, that you understand why, if you do have differential administration pay, you understand why that is, that it's well documented, and you're able to answer those questions. And lastly, to increase manager accountability. And this relates not only to compensation, but also to job description, development and maintenance, to performance management, and of course all of these pieces tie into compensation at the end of the day. So that's the ultimate goal and objective of a compensation plan, and why it's important to consider doing this, and above and beyond the regulation and the need, the requirement to do it. It'll really help you to strategize for the future and to understand the bottom line impact of pay administration. I'm seeing if I have any technical difficulties here. So taking a look at the regulations, the OMB circulars, which of course a lot of us know are being combined into what we at WIPFLE refer to as the super circular. But right now we're still looking at these OMB circulars, and in particular we're going to look at number A122, the nonprofit OMBs. They have a section called Compensation for Personal Services. This is something you're going to want to check out. I'm going to go over this in a very, very high level, but there's a lot of important details within this regulation to understand and know as you go into a compensation plan. One of those simply is the definition. One thing we notice is that the definition in the OMBs of what compensation is differs from the Head Start Act. This probably isn't too much of a surprise. There are unfortunately a few discrepancies between the two that make things a little difficult sometimes, but it's good to understand then what those differences are so you can plan accordingly. The allowability section talks a lot about having personnel policies that refer to salaries and pay administration. So again, you want to make sure that the salaries you're paying are allowable and what that means. And then reasonableness, and very quickly again, the way that it's determined if the salaries and pay administration are reasonable is based on internal equity and external equity, or the labor market, which we'll get into here. But very quickly, internal equity, we want to make sure that positions are being paid equitably within the organization. Again, that might be within the same program. It might be across programs. It might be across departments. So you want to make sure you understand, again, why there may be differential pay. And then the external, that's simply, again, to make sure that pay is equitable for the services being performed. So taking a look at the Head Start Act, just a couple sections mentioned here, but in particular I want to talk about Section 653 with the comparability of wages. Here again, just like in the OMBs, it's reflected that you want to be paying salaries that are equitable for the work being performed, that it is substantially the same services in the same service area. It also talks about minimum wage, which of course is a hot topic for you all in California, and we will touch on that later in the presentation here, but you're not exempt from FLSA standards, and so you have to understand what the minimum wage is in your area and how to work with that in your wage comp plan. Then, of course, that's the floor, but we also have the ceiling cap of the executive level number 2, which at this time it changed in January of this year, and now we're looking at $181,500 for that cap. And again, you want to understand what compensation means and how that Head Start Act defines compensation to make sure that you are not over that cap. And then lastly, there is that definition in the Head Start Act. So again, I recommend you go out and take a look at some of these policies that are specifically mentioned, not only with pay administration, but you'll see these same regulations referred to in any kind of COLA, PIs, and any kind of policy clarifications as well about compensation. So one thing that came out recently that Rick mentioned here as well is the Office of Head Start Wage Comparability 101 document, which is a great and thorough guide for conducting your own wage and fringe benefits comparability survey, if you so choose. But of course, you have a great resource that's offered here by CHSA, and that Kevin talked about a little bit earlier here with some great data. But what this document says is that you don't only want to look at local data, you also want to look at some statewide and national data. And let me talk about that for a little bit and why you want to take a look at that. You want to understand what the markets are like that you're recruiting your employees from, and that you may be losing them to. So again, if you understand what school districts you might be losing teachers to, for example, what is their pay like? Is their labor market different? How do they look compared to our local labor market? statewide as well. You may be recruiting some positions statewide, and so you want to take a look at what the difference is between your local labor market and what the labor market is statewide. And the exact same thing is true for national. We talk to a lot of organizations that recruit their executive level employees on a national basis, and so you want to take a look at how the pay for those positions looks nationally, and again compare that locally, and not only understand those pieces, but how they relate to your budget. So another piece of this information is that there's a correction factor method. So if you're looking at a different labor market or you have a survey from a different labor market that doesn't quite reflect what you see within your labor market, there is an equation that you can do to understand the difference between the per capita median and make that information from that salary survey more applicable to your labor market. Now, write this equation down. That's kind of a joke, but kind of not. If you have this document, it's specified within it and explained very well. But the equation is to divide the median per capita income of your area by the survey's median per capita income. So certainly if you find a survey and it's not your area or in your labor market, don't discount it right away. If you take a look at the methodology and it is reliable and it is valid information, don't discount it because it's in a different labor market. Simply use this correction factor method to understand how it applies to your labor market. And the same is true for statewide. As we know, some of the positions we have within our organizations are fairly unique, and it can be hard to gather data for those positions. So if you find a great survey that's statewide and is looking at all of these positions that you have within your organization, just use that correction factor method to understand what the difference is between the per capita median and apply that to the position, and you'll have some great data for your labor market specifically. Now, another piece of information within this document is that one wage comparability study is just one piece of the puzzle. The market data as a whole should involve more than one survey. You're going to want to take a look at ideally 3 or 4 at a minimum, but as many as you can get your hands on that provide good data for your positions within your organization. The other piece of that, of course, is the internal equity, which we have been talking about before. An internal equity and the external equity, or the market data, coming together is what will build your salary structure. Again, you can't just build it based off of one survey, or even if you have 3 to 4 surveys, as we recommend, and you see the data there, because there are so many intricacies and nuances within your organization, as most organizations within Head Start are fairly unique. You want to have both of those pieces to make a salary structure reflective of your unique organization, and we will talk about that as well in a little bit here. Lastly, you want to have an administration plan, again, to make sure that you can maintain this plan with in-house, or even bring it in-house if you have those resources. I may be having difficulty here switching the slides again. Thank you. So as I said, those were just a couple pieces of the puzzle. This is a high-level look at the puzzle in its entirety. We recommend getting a compensation committee who will work on this and maintain this plan. Of course, to develop and update job descriptions, which are the living, breathing soul to HR, to conduct that internal equity analysis, to look externally at the market data, use those pieces to design a salary structure, conduct your comp ratio analysis, which is essentially a fancy way of saying your gap analysis to understand where your current pay falls in relation to what the market says a position should be being paid. Develop those administration policies, and then to create and execute a communication plan, which is certainly an important thing to be considering as well up front as you're going through this plan, to know how to disseminate and explain this to your employees, to your board, your policy council, and everyone involved in these decisions or impacted by these decisions. We talked a lot about the internal equity analysis, so I'll go over this quickly, but what it does is determines the relative value of each position to every other position in the organization. Again, in case you have some in different departments or different programs, you understand how these relate to each other and what the value is of each of these positions within the organization. When you conduct this analysis, you want to take a look at this either before or at the same time that you're conducting an external analysis. As I explained, you're going to use that external analysis piece at at the same time as the internal equity piece, to develop your salary structure. So make sure that this is conducted and complete, finalized, before you make your salary structure in conjunction with the market data. And who should be taking a look at this? We recommend this is conducted by the compensation committee or an independent third party. Some pros and cons to each here. Compensation committee will understand the value of each position more than a third party will up front. So it depends on who you're working with here, what approach may be taken. The pro to an independent third party is taking a look at this analysis, however, is you're able to separate the people from the position. So it's that emotional aspect there, which can be difficult when working with compensation. An independent third party doesn't know that Jane has been the executive secretary for 10 years and what things that she may bring to the table that the job description doesn't specify but are nice to have in the position. So those are the pros and cons of who performs the internal equity analysis. And now we'll talk a little bit about the external market analysis as well, and I'm going to turn it over to Seth to talk about that market data and how to get the right data and not be fooled by some of the other surveys or other information out there.
Thanks, Shelley. I'm going to try to click forward. Great. So as Shelley said, two key components of a great compensation plan are going to be a healthy sense of your job descriptions and the internal equity between your roles, and then the external market analysis. And here, just within this hour, we have a great example of what we would look for as consultants to help organizations find good external market data. But when you go out there, there are examples like the CHSA survey that are high quality, high relevance, and real timely, and they're the opposite side of the spectrum as well. And so we want to warn programs and our clients to be careful of the data that's out there and make sure you have the right tools to identify and validate that you're looking at good data. So as an example of the other end of the spectrum, and we've seen clients use this data and really warn against it, there are the salary.coms and the Glassdoors that are just open source information. And what I mean by that is people self-report on an individual level what their salary benefits packages are. That data usually goes unvalidated and unchecked. And becomes part of a very large database that you can self-sort and search through. And when we see people use that, we get concerned, obviously, as HR professionals within negotiations and hiring and recruiting. And when we see organizations use it, we get even more concerned. So that's really the other end of the spectrum. When we're looking for good data, we really are looking for data that really meets a lot of these criteria. The right data would be secure, reputable, and reliable surveys. So those surveys that are conducted either by professionals, economists and compensation experts like Kevin, or organizations that are made up of people like that or hire people like that are the best. So we have a library of those as examples, but they're out there and they can be secured by nonprofits for really reasonable rates if you're doing this yourself. We want to make sure that our surveys match job descriptions and not titles. So we're looking for more than just the title of a person or a role within an organization, because those can vary so much by program within our industry and really across different types of organizations, where we might call someone a health specialist, someone else might call them a nurse assistant, and I can go on down the list. So we really need a little more information in terms of job summary than just titles. We want our surveys to consider demographics at a pretty deep level. So where are the data points in the jobs coming from? What industry? What's the geographic location? And hopefully we can get that down to a locality or at least a market area. The number of staff that are included in each organization or each department even. The budget of those organizations, and then what sample size was included within the organizations that responded to the survey. For us, we're looking for, we try to be realistic and not idealistic. We want surveys where at least 5 organizations are responding, but the more information that you have from comparable organizations, obviously, the better the comparability. So when Kevin was talking earlier about an N of 63, easily meets our criteria at the high level, and then when we drill down into the different sectors or regions within California, we're looking for that kind of magic number of 5. And if it's lower than 5, we can still use that information. We just want to balance it out with other data. Next on the list is really the balance that Shelley was talking about between local, regional, statewide, and national data. We know that if we go too local within our wage comparability studies, then our ultimate compensation structure and how we're paying people is going to really reflect a local bias, essentially. And so when the Head Start guidelines come out and help us try to balance those out, we take that very seriously, and we see in best practices too within compensation circles and design that we want a good balance, a healthy balance between regional, statewide, and national data as well. So one piece of the puzzle is one great piece of the puzzle that, quite honestly, as Rick said, is really hard to come by, is that state-level industry data that you get with the CHSA survey. We want to mix in as much as we can with local and national data as well. And then really key component of good external market analysis data is the date of the survey. So we really want to try to get things that are as close to now as possible, as you know, because the economy shifts very quickly these days. The markets that you live in and work in and that are surrounding you also shift quickly. So we try to the best of our ability to get data that's as close to now as possible, but we have calculations within compensation and the industry to be able to what we call age the survey forward, using cost of living adjustments and other kinds of economic terms to make sure that that data can still be used and it's useful, but we just need to make sure we mix it with others. So really good, important point to take what you can get and then make sure that you're using good survey data to validate against each other. We always say a good rule of thumb, and I'd write this down, I guess, if you're trying to get ready for a comp study, is that for an overall compensation study that leads to a good compensation design and structure within your organization, we want to see at a minimum between 3 and 5 studies or good sources used, mixed in with certain physicians with a few more. The more the better, obviously, at the overall level, but 3 to 5 really strong studies we think is good, and we can get a good mix. And then for each job within your structure, we really want to see 3 to 5 at a minimum good data points from those studies. And if it's a complex job and not a straightforward job, we're going to have probably double that amount because we're comparing and contrasting data points from not just different surveys, but also different types of jobs. So that 3 to 5 number is kind of the minimum that we look for. So moving on to taking that external market analysis and what to do with it, well, we start putting the salary structure together from there. So the external market analysis really serves as the key consideration in this day and age for the placement of positions within a structure. That's going to differ a little bit if you're coming from an organization or within a county that uses a step system. That step system then plays somewhat of a role depending on where you are in your process for paying equity to the market. Or considering the factors of internal equity versus market analysis versus what the labor union might potentially want to pay. So when it's an ideal world, and most of our situations now, that external market analysis is still the primary driving factor, and really should be if you think about it, for recruitment, retention, and making sure that you're paying just what you need to pay based on your compensation philosophy. The next step after taking that market analysis is to sort positions by the external market value, those midpoints, and making sure that we have a good midpoint average for a particular group of positions. And what we mean by group of positions there really comes down to the language you use internally. Maybe that's a salary band, maybe that's a classification level. We've heard it called many different things in many different organizations, but it's the groupings that ultimately make up those bands or levels within your organization. Then that midpoint average that we establish within the group helps us in identifying any changes to the pay groups or identifying new pay groups and what the compression or the difference is between those pay groups. So last one on salary structure is then we start, just to give you a little bit of insight into how we conduct these, is we begin with the top position, and then we set subsequent positions based on that market data, again, with the remaining pay groups. And typically what we end up with, and here's where kind of the art and the science come together, is about a 10% progression between the midpoints. There may be higher progressions between upper management and a little bit lower in the lower half of your salary structure, but we're looking for that 10%. And typically we get there by using a good blend of market data and then bringing in internal equity later. Right now, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit, when we have compression caused by different kinds of pressure at the bottom of the pay scale, like minimum wage changes, or at the top, when we have a cap on salaries, that's when these 10% could potentially start changing and shifting downwards a little bit more towards the 8 or 6% compressions. What we do next is take the salary structure, incorporate internal equity, and see what unique positions and unique ranges you might have because of how you value positions within your own organization. And that's a very real need, and obviously Head Start has identified it as well, to make sure that we're not just taking the external market and grafting it onto our organizations, but making sure that we're being real about how we value positions, and then putting those together into a final position layout within a compensation design. What we do next is what we call in the industry a comparative ratio analysis. What this really is just a gap analysis between what the market and your internal equity say you should be paying, each range and then each position within the range, and what you're paying today. And it really is a great tool, a strategic planning or scenario planning tool to allow you to determine where you fall relative to your newly established market and internal equity-based structure, and then help you plan and budget for the future. So if you have a round of funding or a grant that's coming up, and you need to submit a new GABI or a new budget, and are trying to figure out how to tie in COLA, how to tie in the new minimum wage, any additional funding you're getting back from sequestration being refunded, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of issues out there. The compa ratio gives you a great tool, documented tool, to show how you might be able to do that position by position and across your entire salary structure. So it's a great little next step. So after you have that all done, and where this ultimately leads to is administering your compensation and your salaries. So these are the really key steps that we work with agencies on, making sure you can not just check the box, but have strong policies, procedures, and approaches within each of these areas. And I'll go through them really quickly. I want to get down to the one that's highlighted. We strongly recommend developing a written compensation philosophy, which essentially says what you intend to do when you're paying salaries. Do you intend to meet the market? Do you want to lag the market because potentially you have a great benefits package, or you live in an awesome area like San Diego, et cetera, not to slight any other areas where it's just great to live there, and so therefore you can have compensation that might be in front of or lagging the market. We really recommend writing that down to help drive future decisions. You want to outline your plan objectives on paper, identify who has responsibility for the plan, typically falls within the HR function, but sometimes not. Personnel committees, policy councils, and others get involved, so that's great to document. Describe the importance and use of your job documentation, and here's where we probably have the most work from a consulting and education standpoint in terms of job descriptions being up to date and focusing in the right way. You want to describe on paper how internal and external equity analysis process occurs, describe how the salary structure will be administered, all included in your policy and procedure manual or an administration guide, outline how pay adjustments will be handled, and then finally update this process annually. And here's where we see a lot of slippage, because things in this environment, in this day and age, continue to change quickly. And as of right now, you are all considering applying for the approved COLA increase, 1.3% COLA that's been approved and is now in process for you to apply for. And this is why we suggest very strongly to update your plan annually. Whether or not you're bringing in brand new external data or doing a full internal equity analysis is not really a big deal. It's up to you, but that you understand that your structure is up to date, because when a COLA comes along, you're going to want to understand how that kind of thing affects your structure. And if you don't know, we have a completely different training going on around the COLA. We just did a webinar yesterday, and it's a very hot topic. But essentially, the COLA says you're not just paying out a one-time increase to people's salaries. Head Start is requiring that you increase your pay structure and your salary grades up 1.3% across the board for Head Start funded positions. So it is really a big deal to make sure that your plan administration is sound. And then you want to incorporate any tools that you utilized along the way. And I'm running out of time because I want to make sure we have time for questions. So just a few points about making pay adjustments, which I've alluded to. There are a lot of things going on out there, obviously, and so pay adjustments are a big deal once your structure is done. So market equity and making administrative adjustments can go right along hand in hand. If you understand what your market is paying and you have good salary data and survey data like CHSA is providing, it's going to make administrative adjustments easier, and you're going to just be tweaking along the way. Things that might affect when you're making adjustments are obviously the simple and everyday stuff like new hires, job reclassifications, merit increases. Hopefully you can do some of those in the future. Promotions, we hope for those too. I just talked about COLAs, and then obviously minimum wage increases, which California is dealing with obviously at a statewide level and then in different cities as well. And just, I guess, one quick comment about the minimum wage increases is that you just want to understand your business impact for a proposed or in effect minimum wage increase. First of all, does it affect your whole territory and all the areas you serve and where all the employees are? And if it does, then there's probably a compression issue that you have to deal with. If it doesn't, then there's the need to go and see if you need two salary structures or if you need to just change the bottom of your wage structure and how that works. But one way or another, you want to first do an analysis of how that minimum wage impacts your business and impacts compensation. And I'll just go back here to say that if you have a sound structure and a sound policy in place, it makes minimum wage increases less of a big deal because you understand that when you pull on this side of the spider web of your compensation structure, how it affects every other piece of it. If you don't have that down and don't have it on paper, it can be a little scarier to have a minimum wage come across and say this might affect everybody all the way up to the executive director. So you really want to be careful about what business impact a specific minimum wage has for you. So I'll end there and make sure we have time for questions. There is an offer that, like Rick's, for the free slice of data that you offer. Wipfli wanted to pitch in here too and make this a little bit easier for you. So we wanted to give you the opportunity to mention this webinar if you attended, and if you're considering doing wage comparability or need help with wage comparability, that we'll give you a special rate on our normal fees for wage comparability if you've been on this webinar and are purchasing the CHSA new survey data. So we're happy to do that. We love working with our California Head Start agencies, as a lot of you on this call know. We do a lot of other stuff, which I won't get into, but I'm probably going to turn it back over to Rick now so we can answer questions. Thanks very much.
Analysis. I feel like you've demystified the arcane science of compensation analysis, Seth and Shelley. So thank you very much for that. We have about 7 minutes left for questions. I want to make sure people understand that the way we're handling questions on this webinar, if you have any, is for you to type them in, and then I will articulate them. Right now I don't see any questions on my screen. So let me give you a minute if folks had anything that they wanted to input. And I'm waiting, actually. Let me just give you all a heads up for those that might be interested. CHSA, we're in the midst of planning our Summer Manager and Director Institute. It's going to be held June 10th, 11th, 12th. And we will have a policy summit, our annual policy summit. This is going to be down in Orange those 3 days. And there's lots to update in terms of both some of the changes on the federal level as well as what's going on with transitional kindergarten proposals in California. We've got a very interesting infant toddler proposal that we're working on right now at the state capitol. So all of which could be affecting our future as a Head Start community. So I wanted you to think about that. We also, for the Management Director Institute, we're going to have several really interesting tracks, including one just on early Head Start child care partnerships. Another one, we're using the Leadership Challenge kind of leadership training methodology by Kouzes and Posner, and that involves a whole 360-degree kind of survey that you will do before attending the event. And then we've got the National Centers, TMTA networks, doing several really great trainings, including one fiscal training by Belinda Rinker. So think about that. Registration for that will open up in just less than a month. So look at that. I'm not seeing any questions. I guess that's a testimony to what a good job you all did as presenters. Let me, though, open it back up to, before we wrap this webinar, to Kevin and Seth and Shelley, in case you had anything else that you wanted to add before we close this out.
No, Rick, this is Kevin. I think that the results, the few that we shared here, just wanted to stress, of course, the overall report is a good 90 pages. It has one-page per position, where you saw the one example on the screen. And of course, we have about 50 positions, each of which match, with the National Head Start Office's categories of positions. And so I think there's a lot of good detail there. And of course, also as you had mentioned, Rick, I'll be in touch with the folks who have actually ordered the report so that we can go over the comparable, programs, because of course we'd asked during the survey people to just let us know, in terms of sort of the urban-rural, geographic location, size of program, the kinds of programs that they would want to compare to, and those custom reports will include 4 or 5 districts that would go ahead and generate a special detail report for them. So, but those are the only things that had struck me that I had either forgotten to mention or didn't mention sufficiently during my part of the program.
Super. Thanks, Kevin.
No, just thank you to Rick. This is Seth. Thanks very much for CHSA to invite us in and let us participate. We are currently working with a bunch of your members and organizations, and we love helping you out with this sometimes complicated area.
Wonderful. Great. All right. Well, thanks to all of our members from around the state who participated in this webinar. It looks like we had about 50 attendees, so we're thrilled that there's so much interest, and we look forward to working with you. We look forward to any feedback you have on this report and seeing how best we can serve you on this. And for now, we'll sign off. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.